What up? I'm Ben Freeman from Freemanpedia.com, and one of the questions I get most from people like you is, do we have to know any dates in AP World History? And my answer is always the same. No, you don't. There will never be a moment on the AP exam where you need to identify a year or recognize anything based on any specific dates. But I would argue that knowing these dozen dates for AP World History will give you a pretty nice overview of the major themes and ideas and periods that will be heavily featured on the AP World Modern exam in May. So let's start off the dozen dates with the starting date for AP World History Modern 1200 CE. AP World Modern runs from 1200 to present day, but the latest date you're really going to see in the curriculum is 2001. Today, we're going to focus on that starting date, 1200. Here's a map of the first unit from AP World Modern, Unit 1, Global Tapestry. And no doubt your teacher will start you off with a world tour of the major empires and trade routes going on during this first period, 1200 to 1450. How do I know that? That's literally the focus of the first two units in AP World Modern. But this is the dozen dates, so we are going to focus today on the front end of the first period, the year 1200. So how do we get to 1200 CE? Let's start by putting the year 1200 CE into context. Contextualization is something you'll be doing a lot this year. It's required in both the LEQ and the DBQ, and it basically requires you to go into a little background on a topic. In class, I refer to it as the Star Wars crawl. It's that bit at the beginning of the Star Wars movies that lets you know the backstory to the action you're about to see after the crawl floats away into space. And not just that, but contextualization is just good history. You should never jump into a story midway. Give people some background so they can put your story into context. And that brings us to today's date, 1200 CE. Honestly, today's date is a pretty arbitrary date. The rest of the dates over here are pretty specific. I chose those dates for being major historical landmark years, but 1200, not so much. So here's a little context for the year 1200. Let's start with the things that are not a thing anymore. First, all the classical empires are done. Rome is gone. Han China is gone. Gupta in India is gone. And not just gone, but they've been done for centuries. Second, the Vikings are done. They essentially blend into Christian European culture. You're not going to have to worry about Viking longboats coming upriver to pillage your town anymore. Third, the Arabic caliphates are essentially done. Islam has rapidly spread over the past 500 years, but those original caliphates, the Umayyad Abbasid caliphates, are on their way out. Technically, the Abbasid caliphate is still around, but it's a shell of its former self, and it's essentially centered around Baghdad, and we're technically already under the rule of another sultanate. We'll hear from these caliphates one more time over in 1258 next time. Fourth, the idea of one Christian church is done. Christianity is kind of in between schisms at this point. The church is divided between the Greek Orthodox Church and the Western Roman Catholic Church. Fifth, the first major sub-Saharan empire, Ghana, is gone. There will be larger, much more impactful sub-Saharan empires, but the granddaddy of them all, Ghana, is done. Now, an exact date is tough here since Ghanaian history was all oral histories, but just think of it as being over. Sixth, Kievan Rus is done. Now, this is another one that is still technically hanging on, but the state that started what you know as Russia today has fallen to other regional powers. Seventh, the Song dynasty is on the ropes. I mean, look at it. It's lost half its land to the Jurchens, or the Gen dynasty, to the north, and it's about to lose the rest of its land to the Mongols when they invade in the early 1200s. So that brings us up to the starting line of the course, 1200 CE. Think of 1200 like a trough between waves. Troughs are the lowest point between major waves, and 1200 is a nice historical trough. Now, that's not to say that nothing is going on. Rather, in 1200, we are in between some major historical waves. Major waves like the classical empires, Renaissance China, Arabic caliphates, Ghana in Africa, the spread of Buddhism, Christianity, those waves are gone. 1200 is the trough. Coming up after this trough are more major waves. The Mongols, the Turks, the Inca and the Aztecs, the Ottomans, the Delhi Sultanate, the Japanese shogunates, the rise of Mali and sub-Saharan Africa. I could go on and on and on. Basically, AP World Modern's waves are coming after the 1200 trough. And 1200 isn't the only historical trough or break. The course is actually divided into 4 periods along these trough lines. The next trough is 1450. This marks the beginning of the early modern period, which runs until the next trough, 1750. 1750 kicks off the modern period, which runs until 1900, which is the official kickoff of the contemporary period, which runs until present day. So if you have to pick a starting point for modern history, the historical trough of 1200 is a pretty nice spot. With the dozen dates is going to be a series of all these dates. So in each episode, I will break down the year itself, like what's literally happening in this year. There's just not much happening in this year. Like I said earlier, 1200 is just a starting point. The College Board uses this as kind of a jumping off point for the whole course. So 1200 itself is deep in a trough. See all these dates over here? These are all directly tied to super important events that shape the history of the planet. 1200 is just not one of those. So let's go ahead and jump to the end and see what's coming up after 1200. I don't want to give too much away here, but there are some pretty major events coming up after 1200. The biggest upcoming event is the rise of the Mongols. The Mongol Empire will be a devastating event for humanity. Podcasting goat Dan Carlin refers to this moment as a historical forest fire. They will sweep across Asia, leaving a wake of destruction in their path. Afterwards, a new era of growth and trade will emerge in their wake. New empires and trade routes will emerge and lay the foundation for the entire AP World History course. For you, that means Unit 1, the global tapestry, and Unit 2, the networks of exchange. This is where the course begins. So don't think of 1200 as a year you really need to know about, but it is helpful to know when the course begins. The rest of these dates over here are tied to specific trends and events, but today we just crossed the starting line. What? You didn't get all that? A random year chosen to start the course doesn't grab your attention? Don't worry, I got you. The dozen dates are 12 years that can give you a nice overview of the important events and trends in AP World History Modern. The least important of these dates was the focus today, the year 1200. This is where the course begins, and everything you talk about in class this year will mostly be after this year. Alright, the timeline has begun, the clock is running, the next 11 dates are major milestones in AP World History Modern. Next up, the Mongols are coming. I'll see you in 58 years, all the way to the year 1258.